Welcome to the Pharming Your Career podcast with host Dr. Aaron L. Albert, where we explore a variety of healthcare and pharmacy-related topics, including career development, healthcare IT, informatics, innovation, entrepreneurship, STEM, women's issues, and more. Pharming Your Career podcast is part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, and Aaron has had the #1 most downloaded episodes of 2016 and 2017 of the entire Pharmacy Podcast Network. Now, here's your host, Dr. Aaron L. Albert.
Hello, Pharmacy Podcast listeners, and welcome to Pharming Your Career, our own dedicated channel on the Pharmacy Podcast, focusing on your career and taking it to the next level. I'm Aaron Albert, and I am here not only to thank you so much for having us as part of your listening experience, but also sharing that we had the #1 most downloaded episodes both of 2016 and 2017. In the top 10 most downloaded episodes as well, we discovered that authors are wildly popular with you all. So today's guest definitely fits that mold. And if you haven't already heard of her, I'm sure you will soon. And her name is Dorie Clark. And Dorie is an adjunct professor at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and a professional speaker. She's the author of 3 books, Entrepreneurial You, Reinventing You, and Stand Out. And Stand Out was named the #1 leadership book of 2015 by Inc. magazine, one of the top 10 business books of the year by Forbes, and was a Washington Post bestseller. The New York Times has described Dorie as a, quote, expert at self-reinvention and helping others make changes in their lives. Dorie's also a former presidential campaign spokeswoman. She is a frequent contributor to Harvard Business Review and a consultant and speaker for clients such as Google, Yale University, and the World Bank. She's also a producer of a multiple Grammy-winning jazz album. So let's get into it with Dorie Clark. So we are here in the new year with one of my favorite entrepreneurial authors, probably our biggest guest yet on the Pharmacy Podcast and Pharming Your Career. And that's the amazing Dorie Clark. Dorie, welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast.
Hey, Aaron, thanks for having me.
So really just met you in the real world a couple months ago, actually participated in one of your masterminds in New York City. So I hit you up to be part of the podcast then. So I'm super excited to have you join us. And I'll start with a question that I always start with our guests. How did you get to where you are today in terms of your career?
Oh, my goodness. Well, the very short version of that is that I started out as a political journalist, and I ended up getting laid off. And so I had to kind of improvise and reinvent myself. And so my career took a lot of turns early on. I actually couldn't get another job in journalism, so I went into politics and became a spokesperson on first the governor's race and then a presidential race. Then I ran a nonprofit for a while. And eventually, about 11 years ago now, I started my own business where I have been writing and speaking and doing some business school teaching around marketing and branding, but especially around personal branding and how individual professionals can, in this very crowded and noisy environment, actually get known and appreciated for their true talents.
Yeah. And so you've just written kind of a trilogy of books over the last few years. The most recent one is called Entrepreneurial You. And so I'm trying to work on kicking off more authors on my channel and segment this year on the Pharmacy Podcast. So can you tell us briefly to our audience or share what sparked this trilogy of books for you and a little bit more about why or how those 3 books fit together?
Yeah, the trilogy, Aaron, was not originally part of the idea. I was kind of going one book at a time, and Reinventing You had presented itself as a possibility for me because I had started blogging for the Harvard Business Review, and I did a blog post that became popular. It was called How to Reinvent Your Personal Brand, and they reached out and asked me if I would be willing to expand it into a magazine-length piece. So going from about a 700-word blog post to about a 2,500-word magazine article. And then I realized I was kind of onto something when the magazine article got published, because I was then approached by 3 different literary agents asking me if I was represented and would I be interested in potentially trying to turn that article into a book. So I just kind of went with that. But in the course of writing and marketing the book, Reinventing You, I came to realize that there were these kind of follow-on questions. So one, logical one, was once you reinvent yourself into the job or the career that you want, what is the way that you actually get recognized in that career? How can you go from being one of many to being considered among the best in your company or among the best at what you do? So that was the question I tried to solve in my second book, Stand Out. And then the most recent book, Entrepreneurial You, really sprung again organically from that process, because as I was touring around Stand Out and talking about it a lot, I came to realize there are a lot of people that are very good at what they do. And they may even be well recognized and appreciated among their peers, and yet they are not making the money that they deserve to make or want to make because they haven't really cracked the code on how to monetize their business. And so in writing Entrepreneurial You, I wanted to try to understand and solve that problem to help talented professionals figure out how they could be compensated fairly for their efforts and begin to develop proactively multiple income streams.
Yeah, so we want to unpack that a little bit more here. For our audience, who are primarily pharmacists and people working in pharma and healthcare, so do you have to be an entrepreneur, quote unquote, to read any or all of your books? And why or why not? Or what could someone get out of your books who maybe isn't a full-bore entrepreneur?
Yeah, one certainly does not have to be an entrepreneur to read the books. In fact, Reinventing You and Stand Out especially are perfectly calibrated for people who might want to have corporate careers. But even Entrepreneurial You, which is more overtly about entrepreneurship, is something that I believe strongly is relevant for people who work inside companies. Because the truth is, I know from personal experience that, unfortunately, right, things can change in the blink of an eye. I went from having a job to not having a job in the course of 15 minutes, and it's not like there was a lot of lead up to that. In fact, they often try to keep it a surprise so that it doesn't dampen morale or something like that. In my case, I was given 4 days of severance pay, so it's not like I had a lot of time to actually find something else to do. And so you can create an enormous amount of career security for yourself by starting now, before you even need it, to develop a side income stream. And it has multiple benefits. One, of course, is that potentially you could make some extra money, which we would all like. Number 2, it provides a potential hedge against uncertainty, because you have at least something else in the works if, God forbid, something goes wrong with your job. And number 3, it's essentially a form of professional development that you are personally choosing to undertake, and that gives you new skills and connections and abilities that you can deploy in your day job as well. It therefore makes you more marketable in your day job.
Yeah, and I just watched your TEDx talk too, where you talk about the point in time where you were laid off. And thank you for sharing that. I would encourage everybody to go out and watch that, because you were laid off at a very unique time in U.S. history. And I won't say any more to spoil it, so people go listen to it. But I wrote a book as well called Multi-Patientals, where I looked at people as well who had multiple careers going on at the same time. And I found that all of them had been laid off at some point or another. So I think there's some gift in being laid off that actually triggers people to think about what safety really means in terms of a career. And to your point, and the point that you've made in Entrepreneurial You, the new safe is to have multiple things going on.
Yes, that's exactly right. Diversification is key. I mean, we all understand that intuitively when it comes to investments, and yet with regard to our careers, often that very basic truth eludes us.
Yes. And so let's dig into a little more of the most recent book, Entrepreneurial You, and talk about the framework of healthcare and life sciences. So you have Lenny in the book. I would love if you could share a little bit more about Lenny's story.
Absolutely. So in Entrepreneurial You, I profile this guy named Lenny Achan, and he is somebody that I actually met a few years ago now. I was doing some consulting work for Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, and Lenny at the time was the head of communications for the hospital. And he was somebody that everybody was talking about. Everybody was sort of buzzing about him. And so finally one day I got to meet him. We were in a meeting together. And so I started talking to him afterwards and asked him a little bit about his background. And I was just astonished to learn more about his trajectory. And what it turned out he had done is that he actually began his career as a nurse and then had rather miraculously ended up as the head of communications, which of course is not a traditional job path at all. And the way that had come about was that he had independently become really fascinated with smartphone apps. And so he decided to learn how to build them. So he ended up developing a couple of smartphone apps and launched them. And after a little while, eventually somehow his boss found out about this. And at first he was really pretty nervous because he thought his boss was going to disapprove. He was worried that he was somehow going to be accused of violating a policy or maybe moonlighting on company time or just something. But whatever it was not going to be good. But the truth was, it actually was the opposite, because his boss called him into the office and said, Lenny, I hear you've been developing these smartphone apps, and he admitted that he had. And the boss said, well, it turns out we need someone to run social media for the hospital, and I think it should be you. And so because of having taken the initiative, because of having shown that he was both interested in learning about technology and willing to invest his own time and resources into doing it, his boss saw that as a very positive indicator for Lenny's entrepreneurial spirit that could be applied within the organization. His entrepreneurial spirit. So we made him the head of communication, initially the head of social media, and then eventually the head of all communication, because he had done such a terrific job in his post.
And I love that story. It's like a happy ending. So in healthcare, off recording, you and I chatted a little bit about the fact that not everybody's super comfortable with employees having a side hustle. So how do we get more Lenny's bosses, if you will, comfortable in healthcare with their employees having these side passions of theirs? Or can we?
Well, we all know from Buddhism that it's very hard to control other people. That being said, what we are going to start discovering is that companies, just about every company, pays at least lip service to innovation.
Yeah.
Innovation is great. We need more innovation. Well, okay, if that is the stated goal, then it begs the question: how do you get it? And it turns out that instead of the alternatives, how do we acquire innovation? You can spend a lot of money on it. Or how can we create the conditions for innovation? Oh, we could build this sort of special incubator or skunkworks thing and spend a lot of money doing that. Well, okay, how do we make our employees be entrepreneurial? Oh, well, you can do these very time-consuming, pricey trainings. Well, okay, these all potentially are good things. They all could work. But what is the lowest hanging fruit realistically? It is actually taking the entrepreneurial things your employees are already doing and saying, hey, we celebrate that. We encourage this rather than discourage this. And it seems so basic in many ways, but that's what makes it so brilliant and so effective. And I think the companies that come to understand that in a lot of ways innovation and the potential for it is already there. It's just not being tapped. It's not being harnessed. You are going to get a really substantial benefit from the early movers that see that and seize it and create conditions throughout the company or throughout the department that facilitate that.
Yeah, so I love that. We're sitting on a gold mine of talent and opportunity out there, and hopefully the managers listening to this will seize that and maximize that opportunity as well. So switching gears a little bit, you and I met via a mastermind, and our audience may not be familiar with what a mastermind is. You talk about it in your most recent book as well, Entrepreneurial You. So can you share a little bit more about masterminding from your point of view and why you started a mastermind?
Yeah, absolutely. So mastermind groups are a concept that this dates back to the 20s with Napoleon Hill and his famous book, Think and Grow Rich. That was, I believe, the first time that the term mastermind was thrown out there. But the basic premise is that it's a group of people who get together and, it should be big enough that you have different perspectives and some accountability, small enough so that it's not just a big impersonal group. So oftentimes these are somewhere between, let's say 5 people and 12 people, something like that. Mm-hmm. And the groups, there's different variations. It could be a one-time mastermind. It could be a group that meets regularly. But the goal is for professionals to really help each other and to lay out with a lot of honesty and vulnerability what their challenges are and their opportunities, and their colleagues chip in to offer ideas and advice to help them raise their game. And it's exceptionally powerful because we all know intellectually, of course, that it's very hard for us to see our own situation clearly. You can diagnose a mile away that your friend's after some guy and he's just not that into her or whatever, mm-hmm. but like, she can't see it, and it's the same thing for business. You might be banging your head against the wall looking for a solution or trying to make something work, but other smart outside people can actually help you break through very, very quickly because they can see the thing that you can't. And so it's a real way of unlocking value and potential. And so being able to convene something like that, I think, is quite powerful. And I was really lucky that we had a great group, and I'm so pleased to have you as part of that, Erin.
Oh, I loved it. I've actually thrown a few masterminds myself in the past, but you definitely took it to a whole new level. So I appreciate that. So let's switch gears and go back to this concept of multiple streams of income, of the side hustle, et cetera, and kind of try to frame it maybe for our audience in a little bit different way. So in your book, you talk about 7 different streams of income that you have personally. So if you had, for example, a pharmacist that you were coaching and developing and they were sitting in front of you, of those 7 streams or of that individual, what would you ask him or her to get them thinking about starting on that first side stream of income?
Well, I think that one of the best questions to ask yourself initially is, first of all, what is something that people are coming to you already for? That might be an area that you can explore. Because oftentimes when we think about side income streams, we think about creating something that's like wildly different than what we're already doing. Mm-hmm. And you run into problems sometimes because it's like, I'll start a cafe. Well, okay, have you ever run a cafe? Have you ever worked in a cafe? No. It's just a huge learning curve. And so if you are able to come up with something that people already are interested in and recognize that you know about, that's quite powerful. And so, in fact, there's another story from Entrepreneurial You. There's a guy named Dorie who himself is a life sciences executive. He's a VP at a big life sciences company. He originally came up with this idea for like a smartphone app. He didn't know anything about it, and it didn't go well. He wasted a lot of money. But instead, his second go round, he did something much different and much smarter, which is that he had been getting promoted really fast. And he started to get all these inquiries from colleagues. Like, hey, how are you doing that? Hey, can I take you out and talk to you about this? And he realized, this is something that people are actually really interested in, and they consider me to have expertise in it. And so he created an online course about how to get promoted faster. And he was actually able to do incredibly well with it. His first year that he ran it, he earned an additional $106,000 in addition to his day job income from selling this course. So I think starting with what people already are kind of turning to for, often informally, is a pretty good idea. Another thing to ask yourself also is, what would the potential startup cost be of this side activity? I am a big fan of starting with things that are low cost and which, if it fails, it's honestly not that big of a deal. So, for instance, if you start a blog and it doesn't go well, okay, whatever. You've spent probably, I don't know, $13 to register a domain name or something, not a huge thing. Whereas if your first bet is, I'm gonna organize a conference, so let me reserve a ballroom in the middle of Times Square. It's just like a tremendous amount of risk. So having a low risk activity in an area that you are already good at and that people are already turning to you for, those are some good ways to get clues about what could be useful.
Yeah. And, one of the things I absolutely adored about your most recent book is the stories of, the rock stars out there that are really walking the talk that you're talking about in terms of multiple streams of income and building their brands. And we were lucky enough to hear from another person that you had in the book at the Mastermind, Stephanie OConnell. Can you share a little bit about her story and why you included her in the book as well?
Yeah, definitely. Stephanie was kind enough to make a guest appearance in the Mastermind. And she has really done a great job for herself. She has really built her brand into becoming a personal finance expert for millennials. And she now is appearing regularly on television. She has corporate sponsorship deals, etc. But originally, she started out as an aspiring actress. And the way she got into personal finance was not, through training as a CPA or anything like that. It was somebody who was a struggling young actress that wanted to try to make it in New York City. And she realized that if she was going to do it, even at a very basic logistical, financial level, she was going to have to get control of her money and learn more about that. So she began chronicling her efforts to do that in a blog. And the blog started to really gain some traction. And that was the starting point. But I included her story in the book, especially because I was just so struck that one of her key ingredients, one of her kind of superpowers, was just her perseverance with it. Because so many people, when they start out with a side income stream or trying to build their brand or something like that, we all claim we're not, but essentially they kind of are looking for instant gratification. And, you write the first blog post. Okay, well, that didn't do so well. Okay, you write the second blog post. Then by the time you do the third one, you're mad that, only 10 people are reading it. And the problem is that you really have to go in with realistic expectations, because the truth is the first blog, the first 10 blogs, the first 50 blogs, I really hate to say it, are not going to move the needle. There's just too much content, too much noise out there. You're going to have to be thinking in terms of the first 200 or the first 300. That's what's necessary, whether we're talking about blogs, or podcasts, or videos, etc. But if you can keep going through that, if you can find a way to persevere like Stephanie did, you are just putting yourself into a rarefied echelon of people who have persisted and really reaped the benefits.
Persistence trumps talent.
Yes.
So we're at the beginning of a new year, and I'm a resolutions junkie. So I have to ask you, do you have any New Year's resolutions, and or how do you coach other people into getting their own resolutions on paper?
Well, it is apropos, Aaron, that you were asking me about this, because in fact tonight, as we are recording this, I'm going to be giving a talk and speaking on a panel about philosophy and New Year's resolutions. So I'm pretty excited about that. But yes, I'm a big fan of resolutions. And in fact, I have a whole methodology about it that I actually teach in my Be More Productive masterclass.
Okay.
But the basic idea that I like to share with people is that the biggest mistake is that people set too many goals. They get overwhelmed, and you cannot keep your eye on the ball if there's 10 balls that you're looking at. I like to suggest to people that you should only have 2 goals at a time. However, I like to revise them a bit more frequently. So my preferred interval is every 6 months rather than every 12 months, because there are actually some some goals, many, for big projects that you can accomplish effectively in 6 months rather than a year. So, for instance, my goal for the latter half of 2016 was 2017 was I was focused on launching my book, Entrepreneurial You, which meant touring, it meant doing 1 million podcast interviews, et cetera, but that was really the focus. Now for 2018, it can be something totally different because the book is already launched and out there. Of course, you continue promoting it, but not in as intensive of a way. I would say that the primary New Year's resolution that I have is that I have dubbed 2018 the year of optimization for myself. And so I'm working to optimize my existing resources that essentially just need a tune-up. I haven't redone my website in about 4 years, so it's high time for that. I'm in the midst of creating a speaker video right now. I am going to be working on updating my email marketing funnels for my various courses. So there's a wide variety of activities that I'm working on, but it's all related to making existing things better.
The year of optimization for Dorie Clark. I love that. All right. So, Dorie, how can people find you, your classes, your books, yourself online in ways that you'd love to connect with others?
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin. Probably the best way is through my website, which is dorieclark.com. It's DORIECLARK.com. And I actually have more than 500 free articles there that I've written for places like Forbes and the Harvard Business Review, including, in fact, some about New Year's resolutions.
Yay!
There's a lot to dive into there.
Okay.
And for folks who are specifically interested in building multiple income streams, there is a free self-assessment that I created, the 88-question Entrepreneurial You self-assessment, which folks can get at dorieclark.com/entrepreneur.
And you have dorieclark.com/podcast. So we obviously could not cover all the ground that you have covered in various channels, et cetera, on podcasts. So I would encourage our listeners to go listen more if they're into listening rather than reading at your podcast page, because you have, I don't know how many, it's got to be at least 100 different podcasts that you've been a guest on as well. So yes, thank you for that. So Dorie Clark, thanks for being part of the Pharmacy Podcast. Are you ready for our speed round?
Oh my gosh, yes.
All right. What books are you reading right now?
Right now, I'm rereading The Symposium by Plato, which might be pretentious under normal circumstances, but in fact, I am giving this talk that we discussed about philosophy and New Year's resolutions, so I've got to be up on it.
Yes.
It is a good book. What
podcast are you listening to right now?
My latest podcast that I have been listening to, let's see if there's a great thing that I have been discovering. Lately I've been enjoying Ali Brown's Glambition Radio, which I have been a guest on. And, of course, I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History. Okay.
What is your one word to describe the U.S. healthcare system right now?
One word. I would say bankrupt. Or at least it will be after the individual mandates are repealed. So.
Yeah. Well,
see about that.
We always ask that of our guests. And then last but not least, what is the best career advice you ever received?
I think that the best career advice, it's always such a tricky question because I have never had sort of one traditional mentor per se. And
yeah.
So, I haven't necessarily. The question in many ways kind of conjures up for me, like, somebody sort of sitting you down and being, well, young man. But I would say, I can talk about, in some ways, not so much advice, but an implicit lesson, which really struck me, is that I was so surprised. I used to work for Robert Reich, speaking of people who have weighed in on topics related to the healthcare system. I used to work for Robert Reich, the former U.S. Labor Secretary, when he ran for governor of Massachusetts, and I was so surprised to learn that he did not have a doctorate, because he had been teaching at Harvard and then at Brandeis. Now he teaches at Berkeley. And I had always thought to teach at these preeminent institutions that you had to have a doctorate, and I realized he does not. And of course, the corollary lesson is that if you are famous enough, you do not have to play by the normal rules. And that made me realize the importance of what I now teach, which is brand building. Because if you have a strong brand, it enables you to really avoid a lot of the common things that everybody else has to do.
Yeah, and I listened to one of your other podcasts, and you talked about the three, spokes of being a thought leader: the content creation, social proof, and networking. So I think that ties very nicely into that. So Dorie Clark, thank you for being part of our brand new Pharming Your Career channel on the Pharmacy Podcast in 2018.
Thank you so much, Erin. Great to talk with you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Pharming Your Career, a dedicated channel on the Pharmacy Podcast Network. My name is Erin Albert, and this podcast is sponsored by my brand new book, Single Women Entrepreneurs 5 Years Later. The book will be out first quarter of 2018, but most importantly for you now, you can buy it and reserve your copy now at a discount. Just go over to my website, erinalbert.com, and click on store, and you'll see all the books there, including Single Women Entrepreneurs 5 Years Later. I'm only going to have a limited number of hard copies of this book available, so take advantage of it. With our topic today of entrepreneurship, there's a lot more to talk about around becoming an entrepreneur. And in 2018, it's all about the side hustle and becoming your own entrepreneur. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Pharming Your Career podcast, part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. If you have ideas or comments for Erin, be sure to contact her through Twitter. Follow her at Erin L. Albert. And remember to keep your career growing.